If you go onto the website, www.njocf.org, the first thing you see on the home page is a place where you can sign up to be on our email list. And we just, I just send you out emails before our quarterly meetings or the conference to let you know that something is coming up, just as an extra reminder. So it doesn't cost anything. It's very easy to do. Please think about doing that. Okay, ready to roll? Okay. So I called Dr. Jonathan Grayson last week to remind him about the conference and to see if there's anything else that we needed to make available to him so he would be all prepared. And I left a voicemail message for him, and I got this voicemail message back that said, "The conference is this weekend?" There's a silence, and then he goes, "This weekend? Are you sure?" Longer silence. And then in this tiny little voice, he says, "Just kidding." This is the man who's going to speak with us today. I tell you this story because I think what it does is it shows the kind of professional that he is. In order to know how to whip this OCD enemy, you need to have a sense of humor. You need to be very playful. You need to be able to think outside of the box, at least just a little bit. He does that. That's all you really need to know about him, but tradition dictates that I tell you a little bit about his professional background, so I will do that now. This guy is a world leader in OCD treatment and research. At every annual National OC Foundation conference that I've been to, he is one of the fixtures. He's a headliner. He's one of the big shots. He's a Pennsylvania licensed psychologist. After working for 11 years as the executive director of Rosemont Counseling Associates in Rosemont, PA, he then became director of the Anxiety and Agoraphobia Treatment Center and the often mispronounced and always misspelled Alec Kinwood, Pennsylvania. He is clinical assistant professor of psychiatry, Department of Psychiatry at Temple University School of Medicine in Philadelphia. And he's on the scientific advisory boards of the National OC Foundation, the Obsessive Compulsive of the Washington Capital Area, and the Philadelphia affiliate of the Obsessive Compulsive Foundation, one of our sister organizations just across the river. After being guest editor for several different internationally professional psychology journals, he is presently on the editorial board of the psychology journal Cognitive and Behavioral Practice. He has been the recipient of no less than 15 awards. I obsessively counted them on his resume. The latest of which was an unrestricted grant from Pfizer Pharmaceuticals for increasing teacher awareness of childhood OCD and its treatment. No less than 106 papers and presentations to his name, I counted those too, at professional psychological organizations, including the American Psychological Association, the World Congress of Behavioral Therapy, the Association for the Advancement of Behavioral Therapy, the Anxiety Disorders Association of America, and of course the annual convention of the National OC Foundation. He has been a guest on multiple radio and TV shows, including Voices in the Family on WHYY Radio, which is really a wonderful radio show if you ever catch that. The Montel Williams Show on CBS television. I don't have anything particularly complimentary to say about that TV show. And he was also featured in an article in October 2001, People magazine, about his annual obsessive-compulsive disorder camping trip, where him and a whole bunch of OCD-afflicted people go out and get dirty. He is the author of Freedom from Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder, which is one of the big books that are out there recently on OCD, and those books are available here. Raise your hand. In paperback, and if you buy them, we will make sure that we have time for Dr. Grayson to sign them for you for a small cash fee that you pay directly to him. Just kidding. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jonathan Grayson.
wasn't sure where you were going to go with that story, Alan, of how I called you. When you said I have all the qualities of a therapist needed for this, I thought you were going to say cruel. But I am going to hire you as my publicist. You obviously have to, you're in the wrong job. This is not going to be, which is good because you didn't want this, a beginning talk on OCD, but I just wanted to mention, so you don't lose sight of it, that exposure response prevention is the core of treatment. So everything I'm saying, don't think that we're not doing that. You will find that there are handouts that came with this talk, and they are scientifically designed handouts to be totally useless during the talk. So you're stuck listening to me. Anybody looking at such handouts, I will humiliate you. Just out of curiosity, how many people here are professionals? Family members? Sufferers? Okay. I don't know if I like this. It never ceases to amaze me how complicated it is to implement a simple idea. For example, at our center, when we talk about exposure and response prevention, we refer to the theory behind it as behavior therapy's dirty little secret, which basically translates to, if you're afraid of X, then we'll just have you confront it. So does this mean that therapy is basically an expensive Nike commercial, just do it? And obviously not. There was a therapist who brought a client to me. She was having trouble with him. He had a fear, he had a problem with the fact that he or his family could die at any time. So she was doing all the typical exposure you might imagine, having him imagine his family dying and him dying, and he wasn't getting better. So I asked him, do you accept the goal of treatment? He kind of looked at me, and he wasn't really sure what goal I was talking about. I said, well, the goal of treatment is for you to learn to be happy in a world where you or your family could die at any time. I don't want that. Okay. Can you tell me what the alternative is? And he laughed because, couldn't think of an alternative. And, I said, because, if you got an alternative, I'm certainly coming with you. I said, well, this is really good. Now we know why treatment wasn't working. Because although you were doing all this exposure, we don't really know what you were expecting, what goal you had in mind. So, now we know what to do differently. So we can make treatment better. Right? And the problem is that designing a good program of exposure response prevention is relatively easy. But obtaining patient compliance is an art. So you've got to find some way to help people who find it difficult to go into treatment or refusing treatment. We have to help people who are going to treatment to stay motivated, to reduce slips. So this is going to be a really practical presentation, hopefully. We're going to talk about how we use what I call scripts to help treatment. And in general, you might think of scripts as loop tapes that have grown up. Loop tapes were this thing we used to use for imaginal exposure. We would have the individual imagine confronting what they're afraid of. But now we've kind of expanded them so as to create kind of an immersive, total treatment environment. And not only are we going to be doing exposure, but we're going to kind of help the sufferer change their conception of the world around them and everything else. So I'm going to be talking about some critical aspects of understanding OCD. We'll talk about the kind of information we need to get from people to develop scripts using both cognitive and behavioral techniques. And I have to kind of emphasize that because often you will find, and this might apply more to families and sufferers, that when you go to somebody who says that they're doing cognitive behavior therapy, sometimes that's not really true. Sometimes you're going to somebody who's either doing cognitive therapy or behavior therapy, and they may not really be combining them. And if we talk about cognitive therapy, if behavior therapy's little secret is, if you're afraid of it, do it, then cognitive therapy's dirty little secret is basically your thoughts are your reality, so if you're afraid of X, we're just going to change your thoughts about it. Now, the core of cognitive therapy is to help you identify and challenge thoughts, beliefs, and themes that are basically irrational responses to problem situations. But there's a problem. And that is that cognitive therapy was initially developed for depression. And you cannot take something that was just developed for depression and just adapt it to anxiety disorders and OCDs. You need to make modifications. And this failure has led to two major problems. The first is failing to recognize in OCD the primary role of intolerance of uncertainty. Wow. That just got louder?
It's better.
A little bit louder.
It's better back here.
It's better back there?
We ordered
but you're back there. They can hear. That is that regardless of whatever feared consequences somebody has, whether it's contamination fears, checking the stoves to make sure the house doesn't burn down, figuring out whether or not I'm gay, will I kill my wife tonight, that I'm driven, if I have OCD, to find that answer with 100% certainty. Absolute certainty. An inability to achieve this, that's what's going to drive endless ritualizing. And of course the problem is that absolute certainty is not a fact, it's a feeling. For example, I'd like you all to imagine someone that you love. Who are you thinking about? Your groom?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is he here today?
Yes.
Is he alive?
Yes.
How do you know?
Just married him.
How do you know he's alive?
I just saw him
When?
half hour ago.
So it's not possible that he died in the last half hour.
Not in my universe.
So you're very wishful.
Yes.
Yes. Do you actually know if he's alive?
No.
Right. And if I ask this of sufferers, unless this is the core of their problem, they will give the same answer. They basically answer in the normal way, which is they're going to pretend that that feeling of uncertainty is true, and the plan is, I'm not going to deal with it unless I get a horrible phone call. With OC problems, they have a special rule. I want to know right now, definitely. And there's a reason they can't, because they're too smart. There's always a possibility that it might be something different. So that means that if you're going to treat OCD, or if you're working your OCD, that a critical part of treatment is that you're going to have to expose yourself to uncertainty. That overcoming OCD is learning to accept that your feared consequences, no matter how unlikely, are possible. The goal of treatment is learning to live with uncertainty. And the other important thing about that example with the spouse is it tells that individual who's suffering that I'm not asking for something you're completely incapable of. There are tons of uncertainties that you live with fearlessly. So the goal of treatment is to help turn your OC uncertainties into like those other ones. So we're going to have these scripts, and we're going to use cognitive techniques to challenge OCD's core assumption, intolerance and uncertainty. But when we're making a script, we're going to have to evaluate its usefulness by a very simple rule, a critical rule that often is forgotten in traditional cognitive therapy. Is this technique supporting exposure, or is it neutralizing? And using this simple rule, a cognitive technique is neutralizing reappraisals of meaning if I'm attempting to convince the sufferer that his or her feared consequences are not likely. It is neutralizing if I'm providing you with reasons why you shouldn't be concerned. To support exposure, that technique must simultaneously encourage the sufferer to confront their fears and to risk the consequences of doing so. So that means if I'm talking to a client, either face-to-face or in a script, I'm not going to say their feared consequences aren't likely. I'm not going to say this contamination probably won't hurt you. And you know what? If you think about it, that's the rule that everybody uses for the rest of their life. That's the rule that sufferers use for the rest of their life. Right? When, think about it. When you get in a car, you know that there's a risk that some idiot will ram into your car and hit you and kill you. And despite that, you get in your car. Some of you even talk on your cell phones in the car, so you actually increase the risk. And what's your plan? I'll deal with it when it happens. You don't say, there is no way I'm not having a car accident today. How many of you drove here? So I feel really good because basically you all risked death to see me. Right? That's pretty cool. Remind you, you're all real important because I risked death to talk to all of you. So we're going to try to remind somebody as I'm making this script about their feared consequences and what you're going to risk doing exposure. And I'll talk about it and I'll say these things might happen, rather than saying they will happen. If somebody has a fear that they might start a fire if they don't check the stove properly, I won't say, a fire has started in your house because you've checked the stove. You didn't check the stove. I'll say something like, well, maybe you won't, if you don't check the stove tonight, it might be that a fire will happen. And if a fire happens, it may be that your house will burn down. And if it burns down, you will be responsible for killing your wife and children and their horrible deaths. And everybody's going to blame you for being such a... And I'll go on like that. So that way I get to say all the risky things, but I put it in terms of this might happen. We don't do this to be reassuring. We do this because that is the real fear. That is, the person generally doesn't think the house will burn down. Right? The problem is it might burn down. I'm not, in the sheet that you're not allowed to look at, I do mention some other cognitive distortions. And what I just want to say about them, just check it, I'm really looking good. What I want to say about them is that when doing it with OCD, we're using these things differently than when we use them with not OCD. So for instance, if I talk about black and white thinking, where something is either all good or all bad. If I tell one lie, I am a liar. So normally in a cognitive therapy for somebody who's not OCD, we might challenge that and talk about, are you really a liar or do you just tell one lie? And we'll kind of go through with what's normal, because they don't really have that question that other people have of like, does one lie make me that? Or then they might start obsessing, okay, well one lie doesn't make me a liar, but how many lies does make me a liar? So with OCD, if I'm going to talk about black and white thinking, I might point out that this is what they're doing, but then the goal of treatment does not become some kind of reassurance that, well, you're not really a liar. The goal of treatment becomes, you're going to become as much a liar as the rest of us. And take the risks of whatever that means. There's some cognitive techniques that are used in the course of treatment, and some of them, there's one technique called the experimental method, which you may or may not know by name. And the experimental method basically says, we're going to try doing this exposure, and we'll see what happens. And when you see that nothing happens, that'll be cool, you'll know you're safe. So in our treatment, we never use this, because we're trying to reassure the person. People with OCD are much smarter than this. Let's face it, if I do contamination, I'm not worried about getting AIDS tomorrow. It's next month. It's 6 months. Cancer is 20 years. We had this client who came to us, and she had the fear that maybe her thoughts could kill people. And she actually had a very reason for this, that she had read a poorly done study about praying, which said something like people who were prayed for in the hospital without knowing that they were being prayed for did better than people who weren't prayed for. So she reasonably assumed that if praying and thoughts can help people, then obviously thoughts can kill people. And what we said to her is, well, it might be that your thoughts can kill people. But what we know about your thoughts is that you do not have a 100% hit rate. That there are a whole bunch of times you miss, and so we don't really know which of the deaths around you may have caused and which were just random. So our idea is that we want you to learn to live with this risk, and until you can have 5 people in a row dead with no misses, we don't want to worry about controlling your thinking. So in the first week of treatment, because she was really ready to move fast, we worked on killing her father. He died 1 week later. If I was using what is called the experimental technique, I'm in a lot of trouble now, right? We've now just, oh, we're just going to try to kill your dad with his thoughts, and obviously he's not going to die. For us, we said, well, we still don't know if you killed your dad or not. But, that's only one. So you've got 3 or 4 more to go in a row. So we would like you to stay in treatment. Which she did. And she did get better. So again, we don't want to use any technique that is trying to foster neutralizing, is trying to be reassuring. The other faulty assumption in cognitive therapy when you translate it to use with anxiety disorders is it kind of overestimates the power of logic to control feelings. And it's really a risk for family members or therapists because it's really easy to not feel bad about something that's not your problem. I mean, generally when somebody tells a sufferer, oh, stop doing this because it makes no sense, Well, the sufferer doesn't listen for a few reasons. First of all, they already knew it didn't make sense. It's not like this is some like, oh, God, why didn't I think of that before? Okay, I'm fine. They don't listen because although they know it doesn't make sense, they know that the family member has no idea of how bad they're feeling. The family member has no idea how bad they will feel if they confront it, because it's likely that person at times has tried to confront it, suffered horrible anxiety, and if it's just a family member, then they have, they know that that family member has no idea whether the anxiety is ever going to go away. Why would they listen to a person who knows nothing? And for those people who don't have OCD, who can so blatantly say, hey, it's a probability then, it's nothing to worry about, you might think about having a 16-year-old daughter on her first date with some kid you don't know who's only had his driver's license for 3 months. And it's now 2 in the morning, she was supposed to be home at 12, and of course her cell phone isn't responding. Now, statistically, she's okay. She's not doing anything depraved, and she's not being horribly mutilated. But how many parents will be calm just saying, hey, look, it's probably okay, so don't worry. It's really easy to be calm for a problem you don't have. I could take anyone in this room, put a shock electrode on your hand, ring a bell, shock you, soon you're going to start jumping to that bell. And I take that shock electrode off, and logic says nothing's going to happen. And as you all know, your body doesn't really care. When I ring that bell, you're going to jump. So if I'm expecting logic to change feelings, I'm in a lot of trouble. The only thing logic is good for is it might give me a reason to go through the pain. I'd like to do one other thing. How many of you got a pencil here right now? Oh God, not enough. You're not taking notes? Anything, pen or pencil. You can turn my sheet over. And I'd like you to, again, think about somebody you love. This is really particularly critical for family members and therapists to do. Okay, get that person in mind, and I'd like you to write, I want, and put that person's name in. And now continue writing, to die a horrible, painful death. All right, how many people without OCD have crossed that out? Oh, good. How many people without OCD, you're in trouble, have not written it down at all? Okay, so you don't have OCD. Why didn't you write it? Why? What, you can't? I'm sorry. I held a gun at your head. You're not writing this down? If I held a gun at your head, you'd let me shoot you. If I held a gun at your head, would you let me shoot you? So you would write it down. Now you keep saying I can't, so obviously you can, because you just admitted if I held a gun at your head, you would. Okay, so why won't you write it? It doesn't feel good. So here I am, you're here for a demonstration about OCD, and I'm trying to put you through something, and you're saying just because it doesn't feel good, you won't write it. Yes, well that's why I picked you. I heard you had a big mouth, and I gave it, I can't write it. And it's like, oh, she's the target. So why not? Is it going to make it happen? Is not writing it going to get it out of your head? No, because I've already said it and I keep talking about it. Is it out of your head yet about the idea of him dying a horrible, painful death in your room? How many people who wrote it would like to cross it out?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, you can all cross it out if you want. Stop! Why do you want to cross it out? Yeah, you started crossing it out. Why? Okay, it's not nice. So what? What's crossing it out do? Well, he knows you're listening. I mean, you're in great shape. He knows why you wrote it. It's not like you come home and he sees like, what is this? What have I done to you? He knows why you wrote it down. You're listening to the crazy guy on stage. So why were you writing? Why were you crossing it out? Yeah, but it's already written. So So you're trying to undo it? Okay, so here we have something where a bunch of people without OCD who so blatantly can sit there and say to you, oh, stop worrying, this makes no sense. And for a demonstration, they feel real uncomfortable. Suddenly, something, right, that's technically harmless feels really scary, uncomfortable. And you know, as much as they're not saying it, we all know that secretly they're a little bit afraid of like, am I bringing it on? You know, am I going to make it happen by having that thought? You know, I don't want to say that out loud because I'll look like an idiot. But, you know, we know it. So, you know, the only difference is, you know, when you're sitting there, if you ever try to tell a family member or your therapist ever trying to tell somebody that, you know, this is an irrational fear, you should remember this. Because this is hard. And, of course, for you, it's much easier than it is for clients. So, with that in mind about cognitive therapy, right, that it's not, you know, logic is not going to change feelings. It just gives me a reason to do this horrible treatment. And that the core of OCD is going to be confronting uncertainty. But if we're going to do that, it's really important to correctly assess what the patient's problem is. Right? Because if you know what somebody's obsession is, that doesn't really tell you what they're afraid of. Now, when I use the word obsession, I'm saying kind of what the person appears to be scared of. If I have contamination fears, it does not mean that I'm afraid of getting sick. It might mean I'm afraid of getting sick. That is one thing that contamination fears might focus on. I might not worry about getting sick and die myself. I may be concerned that my family is going to die. Or I may not have any concerns about sickness at all, which just feels crazy to me because I says like, I know I'm not going to die. I don't have any fear of that. I just can't stand the idea of it on me. It's icky. Their feared consequence. Their worst thing is being dirty. Just like that. It doesn't have to go beyond that. I had one man who, he came in and his obsessions focused on, there were many, but two of them. One was he'd have this image of a microwave oven in his head and opening it, and it would like burst into flames. He also worried about the front door. He would constantly check the front door and make sure it was locked. And, you know, so it would seem like he's afraid of fires in the house and afraid of somebody breaking in and, you know, hurting his family. And there was a point in time where that was the fear. But at the time he came to treatment to me, that was no longer his fear. His fear was that he might keep obsessing. So he would do the rituals not to stop those things from happening, but to try to stop obsessing. And he'd gone through a behavioral program elsewhere, and so whenever he was confronted by an obsession, he would basically obsess, what's the quickest way to make this obsession stop? Should I try to stop it by doing behavior therapy? Or should I try to stop it by ritualizing? So his behavior therapy became a ritual, because he was trying to make sure that he would never obsess again. Our goal, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, was not to try to stop the obsession. Our goal was to try to let him live with those thoughts. To try to figure out what somebody's feared consequence is, we're going to use a technique called downward arrow. And just very simply, I'm going to say to the person, well, if X happens, what would happen next? And if that happens, what would happen after that? And if that happens, what would happen after that? And, you know, sometimes we'll find that their OCD fears are actually worse than the consequences. You know, if I've suffered from OCD for 10 years and almost been housebound, and my focus is I'm worried about locking my car because it might get stolen, you know, a stolen car that's insured, losing that seems a lot better than all I've lost to my OCD. Obviously, other times, if I'm worried about my father dying, OCD seems better. And, but it's important to not go past the point of like what's relevant to that sufferer. You know, with the man that I was talking about, I could have said to him, well, okay, suppose you do obsess and you can't stop obsessing. What would be wrong with that? He could probably come up with some things, but they weren't the critical one for him. For him, it was, that is the worst. The fact it might, oh, maybe it would interfere with work, or maybe it would interfere with this, that wasn't the problem for him. In general, if we're talking about obsessions, and I'm just going to quickly run through this, you know, there are a couple of common categories of feared consequences. You're looking at the handout or something. I know I'm boring, I'm sorry. Fear of a harm of oneself or to others. Fear of what a thought or action might mean. You know, why do I think about killing my wife? I don't really want to kill my wife, but I'm thinking about killing my wife. Maybe I really do want to kill my wife. Fear of forgetting something or losing something. Fear of misperceptions or misunderstandings. Was that bump in the road a person? Did I hear you right? Did you hear me right? And fear of imperfection. And then these other two, which I'm going to kind of talk a little bit more about. Fear of anxiety or the uncomfortable feelings resulting from the obsession. Fear of constant attention or constant perception. Now, in some sense, these focus on most OC symptoms. Everybody hates the anxiety that accompanies it, so they're really afraid of it. But for most people, that's a secondary kind of fear. I'm worried about my family dying from contamination. That's what I'm mainly worried about. But there are people where the primary fear is just the feelings, or the primary fear is just the attention to something. Somebody has what's so-called neutral obsessions, where I keep obsessing about the fact I breathe, or obsess about the picture on the wall. Right? It's technically neutral, and again, what is my fear? It's going to be that this thought will never leave me. In an effort to find fear consequences, I can also look at how rituals function. Because again, the form of the ritual doesn't necessarily tell me what it's trying to do. Rituals fall in a few categories as preventing and restoring. Right? I check the clock to make sure that it's set correctly so I'm not late for a meeting. This is one problem I don't have. I discovered that this morning. I did forget to set my clock last night, and I woke up at the time I was planning to leave the house to come here. It was a really exciting morning, but it turns out driving 80 miles an hour got me here early. So that's good, I got extra sleep. Preventing or restoring. When I wash my hands, I'm trying to get back to my former state. Analyzing or figuring out. Why am I having this thought? Does it really mean that I want to kill my wife? And do I have a secret urge to kill my wife? Or it's really just a thought and I don't have to worry about it. Maybe it's just OCD, maybe it's my OCD, then I don't have to worry because OCD thoughts aren't really real, but maybe this one isn't an OCD thought. Controlling or stopping feelings. Or controlling or stopping thoughts. The man that I talked about who would either do behavior therapy or his rituals, he wasn't trying to prevent a fire, he was trying to make his thoughts go away. And the last ritual is one that I'd like to spend a little time on. For lack of a better word, we call it the wishing ritual. And it's not a straightforward ritual because the goal isn't as obvious as the other ones. It's not going to restore, prevent anything. It kind of looks like analyzing and figuring out, except the individual really has no hope of getting any kind of resolution, and it's not going to control feeling or thoughts. And the statements that go along with this ritual are something like, I can't take another second of this. It can't happen. I can't take this. I'm going to go crazy. The core of this wishing ritual is denial. So in order to explain this ritual, I have to explain what denial is. Now, undoubtedly, we've all talked about denial, and we all kind of think we know what it means. We ever think exactly what it means? When we talk about it, you have a family member who dies, about being in denial of that death. Now, we all know that being in denial of that death does not mean I have this kind of delusional fantasy that they're not dead. So what does it mean? Anybody want to guess? Okay, simply defined, denial is comparing reality to fantasy. In the case of death, it's not this delusional fantasy that the person's alive. It boils down to the statement of, life would be better if my loved one were still here. That's denial. I mean, it might be true that life would be better if they were still alive, but you're right, that's not going to happen. And it's a fantasy because although you imagine the ways it might be better, it might be worse. Some other horrible disaster could occur because they're alive. But right, something more terrible is not part of the fantasy. Because whenever you compare real life to a fantasy, fantasies always wins. Because basically you don't put crap in a fantasy. And when we do this, we destroy the moment. And imagine it for yourself, for you. Imagine that you're in the mountains with your new groom, at a nice little lake at sunset. It's nice, but you think, if I were fabulously wealthy, I could be at this Caribbean resort with waiters bringing us at the snap of our fingers, tropical drinks, watching a sunset over the Atlantic. Which is better? But in doing that, I've now taken away from this really nice mountain lake sunset. We see instances of this throughout our lives, right? If we have a woman who's in a bad relationship, and she knows all of her lover's faults, but she says she can't leave him because she loves him. She'll describe how wonderful it can be at times and wishes that he was that way all the time. And what she's really saying is that she loves 20% of him and wishes that the other 80% would change. And if that 80% would change, he'd be someone else. Does she love him? I would tell her she doesn't. I mean, I'm not arguing she has those feelings. But what she does love is she loves 20%. She really needs to find somebody with that 20% plus. And so you can't get, maybe 80%. You're not going to get 100, but you can do a lot better than 20. So why would anybody engage in denial, right? It's obviously maladaptive. And the thing is that denial, there is a relief that is provided by it, because the wishing ritual helps us to defend against the loss that acceptance would bring. That woman in this bad relationship, if she would leave this guy, everybody would say, great, you left that guy who beats you, that's so wonderful, you can start your life again. But what about her fantasy relationship, where she was clinging to 20%, wishing she had more? Now she has nothing. She's alone. She doesn't know if anybody's going to be there for her. So if she leaves, she's got nothing. If I'm a gambler, and I finally stop gambling again, everybody's really happy for me. You're going to get your house back, your family can come together, but I'm sad. I'm never going to be rich. I just have to be like the rest of you and work. Of course, there's a problem with that, right? He never was going to be rich. That was his fantasy. Even in mourning a death, denial feels better in the short run than acceptance. You can hear it in the words of denial versus acceptance, right? In denial, life would be better if my loved one were here. In acceptance becomes, my wife is gone. Right? The sadness of that statement is far worse than the statement of denial. Mourning is a process of moving from fantasy to acceptance. And you don't get to speed it up. It's not like if I understand the process, I can bypass it. My wife can die tomorrow and I'll be fine the next day. I can not prevent it, but I can't speed it up. But if I don't mourn, then I'm trapped forever in a fantasy. Something I can never have, just like a gambler, just like the lover, and just like often people with OCD. When the person's obsession, there's this one subcategory of obsessions where the focus is on trying to control feelings, trying to control thoughts. When they are obsessing about obsessing, the wishing ritual is primarily what they have. And these neutral obsessions can be among the worst, because it seems like the feared consequence is coming true. Again, if I have somebody with a hand-washing problem that they're worrying about dying from contamination, it tends that the family doesn't die of AIDS. But if I have a neutral obsession where I'm focusing on my breathing or just obsessing about obsessing, I say to myself, if this keeps up, my life is horrible. And it's true. All the time I'm obsessing, my life is horrible. I can't stand it. So I spend all my time thinking about how much it would be better if I wasn't doing this. And again, there's some ways this plays a role in all OC problems, but the thing is, if it's a secondary problem, that is, I'm more concerned with my family dying from AIDS, I don't have to address it directly. But then there are times where it's the primary problem, and it does need to be addressed. All of this brings us to the next part, right? Because I now kind of have dealing, I know what the core of OCD is, I know I have to pay attention to feelings, I've identified all these feared consequences. And then the part I'm not going to talk about is, we've made a hierarchy of all the things the person's afraid of. But really, before I start treatment, I have to do this other critical intervention. I have to ask them the question, are you willing to learn to live with uncertainty? That you're gay, that bump you went over was some child who bounced off your car and you're going to leave him for dead. The man who didn't think about it, who didn't want to think about his family dying. Right? Treatment failed because nobody asked them the question. Do you want to take, do you want to learn live and be happy, knowing that your family or you can die at any time? They didn't ask him that, so he couldn't really do anything about that. His response to that question was sad. He didn't want to take that goal. How can he get better? He knows there's no alternative. He's basically choosing to live with the wishing ritual, wishing that there could be some way that he doesn't have to think about it, wishing there could be some way of not having to acknowledge that. So, it's not worth starting treatment with him. He's not accepting it. Now, when we're talking to people, there is one way that I try to help them accept this loss. I ask them another question that's really important. I'll ask them, have you ever seen the movie Fiddler on the Roof? How many people have seen the movie here? Do you remember how it ends? You. Cool. Most people, by the way, don't, so you don't have to feel bad. The movie takes place in 1910 in Russia, in a Jewish ghetto. And at the end of the movie, the Russian government comes in and says, you have 24 hours to leave. It is the worst moment of their lives. They're going to lose their homes. They can't get all their property together. Friendships are going to be broken up, right? Because they're all going to be splitting up, going all over the place. It is the worst moment of their lives. Now, the movie doesn't tell us this, but do you have any guesses to where they're going? Yeah, I heard somebody, a ringer there. They've heard this before. Who said that? Yeah, they have to raise their hand. They're going, most of them, we know historically, are going to come to America. So they're going to miss more pogroms by the Cossacks. They're going to miss the Russian Revolution. They're going to miss Stalin and his religious purges. They'll miss World War II and the Nazi incursions into Russia and the massacres. It's the worst moment of their lives. The trip here is terrible, right? These are people in a landlocked country who haven't been more than 20 miles from their village. Now they're in a boat. Watch this. I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen again, or probably not. I said probably. It's unlikely, but it's not impossible. It could be a miracle. They have happened. I just haven't seen one yet. So, they're in this boat, not in the good seats. They've never been in an ocean before. The worst moment of their lives. And what we say to clients is, you're kind of like those people. And what we're saying is, look around you. You're in Russia. We're saying, come to America. But this new thing I'm describing to you sounds terrifying and scary, but we'd like you to come to America. It's critical when you're asking somebody this that we're really clear, this is something you want to learn to do. You want to learn to live with uncertainty. Right? If it was just a matter of deciding, it would be really cool, treatment would be over that day. Okay, I'm going to be uncertain. It's learning. It's like deciding to go to New York. The decision doesn't get me there, I still have to make the journey. But without the decision, I probably won't end up in New York. So, we're going to try to help support sufferers, and we're going to have this two-pronged approach. Right? I'm going to be doing the typical treatment with exposure, response prevention, but I'm going to augment it using these scripts and cognitive therapy. I'm going to use another method, the cost-benefit analysis. And just earlier, I think he coughed, and I'm not sure if some of it got on me, so I'm not sure if I should go out and just take a little. I mean, this could be a good break time for me for us to walk with. Well, why would you stand here and take the risk of getting sick? Well, I don't want to take that risk. I think I might got something on. Well, why would you take the risk? To get better? Yeah, why else? What have you lost to OCD? I just spend hours washing, and when I leave now, also, I mean, another reason to take the risk is, like, you know, I look like an idiot in front of all these people. You know, and it's already wrecked a lot of my career. There's a lot of stuff I haven't been able to do because of that. I'm going to do a cost-benefit analysis with the person. What have you lost to OCD? And I'm going to have to help them. I want to know all the gory details. Because often, I mean, even though the person knows they've lost a lot, often in the moment of confrontation, they kind of forget that. People with OCD are tremendous gamblers when it comes to their OCD. You know, being in New Jersey, how many people have played the slot machines? It's a very strange audience. You live this near slot machines and you don't gamble? You know, because we all know that if you play the slots, you're probably going to lose. I mean, that's what they're there for. When you're standing in front of the machine, you have this fantasy. Wouldn't it be cool if I won? You know how you're going to spend the money, and you know, it does happen. So, you know, I put my quarter in, 3 if I'm serious. I pull the lever. I'm like shocked. Exactly what I would have predicted has happened, but like I wanted it so bad, and it's like, and people with OCD do this with rituals. They know they might get caught in a ritual, but they feel like, you know, if I can just get this right, I won't have to deal with this. And like the gambler, they're shocked. They'll try again and basically go into debt. One of 2 terrible things happens. Either they get caught in rituals for a really long time, or like the gambler, God bless you, or like the gambler, they have a win. But the win is never the big win. It's just enough to keep them hooked. But you know, I still think maybe I should get out of here for a little bit, because I mean, it's just saliva maybe. You know, or you ever see that movie where they show it spreading out in the room? That person, who sneezed? I don't know how far you are from me. I heard that.
Close enough to get me.
That's what I'm afraid of. I don't like that. Well, you know, yeah, but why will you stay here and do this? I've gone through those reasons. How's your OCD affect your family? It's a pain in the neck. Well, I make them wash and do all kinds of things. Do you love your family? Yeah. Would you do anything for your family? Anything. You're a liar. You won't confront this for your family. So I'm going to help them identify other things. You know, and it's kind of a confrontation, a semi-gentle semi-not. I'm offering some alternative. You know, I'll say to the person, and I will put this in the script, because what we're doing is these scripts, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, what the heck. These scripts, not only will I combine the exposure, all this horrible stuff happened, but I will keep reminding them why they're doing this. And one reason you're doing this is because you have OCD and you claim you love your family and you'll do anything for them. And you know, part of the reason you do this, even though you might kill your children doing this exposure, is because you have OCD, you know, there is some risk that your child will develop OCD. And what do you want to teach your child about having OCD? Do you want it to be the way you are right now, teaching them that if they have OCD is hopeless? Or would you like to teach them that it's worth it? Do you want to help them be functional or not be functional? Why are you taking this risk? Because we want people to constantly be thinking about that, right? Because people kind of slip out of that thought. We'll also help people recognize that their rituals don't work anyway. That is, if somebody describes their rituals to me, I can describe how they're messing up. I remember I was in, right after 9/11, during the anthrax fund, I went into a bank and there was a teller who was wearing gloves. I didn't resist doing this, but I was sitting there thinking, I wanted to say to her, you're making a terrible mistake. Gloves are only going to protect you from skin anthrax, which is very diagnosable and not fatal. If this is a problem, you need to be wearing a mask. It's true. Anybody, when they describe their rituals, I can explain to them how they're basically not ritualizing enough. You know, do you make your family wash their hands all the time? Yeah. How about when you're not there? Well, you know, when they're not there, I don't know if they listen to me. But, you know, it's okay because it's not my fault. What do you mean it's not your fault? If they're going to die because of this, shouldn't you be doing more? Hey, they could die. And you just, you know, you say, oh, it's not my fault because, what, you're not home? Sure, it's your fault. Now, you know, we want, in convincing people, I thought Ina got to my notes for a second. I was looking, like, what is this? We find, what, you know, now a lot of times for the issues that the sufferer is having where they're basically being inconsistent, you know, they say like, yeah, that part doesn't bother me in a logical way it should. You know, they're kind of a little like, I don't know why I can do that. And we're not trying to point out the inconsistency in an effort to say, well, you know, you're safe for pointing out that basically your worst fears are already coming true. You know, so really we're just kind of making it more obvious. We're also going to explain to them that this inconsistency is good. When you're looking at OCD, the measure of, you know, consistency turns out to be the measure of severity. The more consistent I am, the worse my problem is. And we also have to help sufferers understand this really critical thing about people without OCD. People without OCD lie. So, excuse me. So, you know, when my wife has this college class, and I always start the lecture like this. It's really dry. And I'll ask them, how many of you guys would like to join me? For some reason they look at me like I'm nuts. Actually, usually I step on it also. You're going, ew, well what's the difference? What is on the floor? I've walked on the floor already. Is my shoe worse than the floor? Magically, yes, but I don't know why. So, you know, then I just go on with the lecture. I just kind of leave it and they're just looking at me. Midway through the lecture, I'll say, and this is college kids, how many of you guys go to parties? Gee, you know, this is like all of them. And at parties, how many of you guys like sit on the floor like this? How many of you guys wash your hands before you eat? And because they don't have OCD, they don't change their behavior. And they still won't put their hands on the floor here and do that. How many of you suck on your pens, you know, put them in your mouth? Right, so I say to you, we eat this off the floor. No, but can you tell me your pen hasn't been on the floor? Well, yeah, it's probably been on the floor. We touch a dumpster and then have people eat, and it's like, oh my God, but how many people take trash out in the morning, put it in the trash can, and then, you know, eat when you get to work because there are donuts there, or that's when you eat your breakfast? People without OCD basically don't know what they're doing. I had this mother who, her husband had OCD, and she said to me, you know, sometimes you have to wash. So this is a challenge for me. I'm up for it. I'll give you an example. Well, you know, I take my kids to the children's zoo. And at the zoo, when they go there, I mean, really, there is poop on the ground, there's poop on the animals. I let them do all that. But before we eat lunch, I have them wash their hands. Makes sense. Do you make them wash their hands as soon as they leave the children's zoo? No. You know, she doesn't have OCD. Do you eat lunch as soon as you leave the children's zoo, just in case she's tricking me? No. How old are your kids? 3 and 5. Do your kids put their hands in their mouth? She knew, without a doubt, that her kids do that. That she wasn't thinking about that when she lets them play in the children's zoo. So the very thing she's trying to have them avoid is happening. And again, because she doesn't have OCD, they still wash their hands before lunch despite the fact it's useless. It's like moms making their kids wash their hands before dinner, but at soccer practice, they can eat those oranges with those filthy, dirty hands. People without OCD don't know what they're doing. So we want to help people be inconsistent. And in this cost-benefit analysis, and you're really going to have to guide a person through it, we kind of have identified 3 areas that we're going to be attacking as we're doing treatment. Which is, how will your life improve? That is, what if you lost OCD? How's your family's life going to improve? Are you going to be brave? And your rituals don't work anyway. I mean, why am I protecting the whole house if my family's already contaminated it? I'm acting like I'm protecting it, but basically, they've already wrecked it. How badly do we want to break, Alan? I mean, I could do it now. I can keep talking.
Give me a second.
Is this the right moment?
Yeah. But really make it 5 minutes and start in 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Go! It's 11:57 and 53 seconds. About how we develop this idea of scripts, because it does go beyond imaginal exposure. And as a therapist, we often have this experience where we have a really great session. Everything we say seems just right. The person suffering gets everything. It's like everything in the world came together. And then we have this other experience. It turns out a week later, somehow the person seemed to forget it very quickly. So we tried to figure out, well, what are we going to do about this? So initially, when we would use this imaginal exposure stuff, the instructions to the sufferer was, we want you to listen to this tape we're making, for a few hours a day. And he suddenly had this brilliant insight that, I don't know why it took 20 years, which is, why not listen to it more than a few hours? Why not listen to it as much as possible? Because by accident, if you're suffering from this or any problem, you actually have this well-developed repertoire and reasons for avoiding and ritualizing. And you repeat this over and over in your mind without realizing it. And, in fact, if you think about it, you might think of, that you have these 2 competing advertising campaigns in your head. We have the OC campaign and the recovery campaign. The OC campaign, that's got the glitz, glitter, polish, money of Pepsi. The recovery campaign is no brand cola. And this OC campaign, the pro campaign, the VOCD, it's a great campaign, right? It lies. It promises you relief if you'll just do the ritual. It's going to threaten you. If you don't do this, you're going to pay for it. You're going to be anxious forever and kind of wrecks your self-esteem. You're crazy. You do this stuff. It makes no sense, so you better do it because you're already losing it. Kind of fosters despair. You might as well do it now. You're suffering. What's the point? You give in always. Anyway, do it now. Why keep suffering? You're going to be wrecked, but come on, you're worthless. And right, it doesn't do this calmly. It does it with pretty graphic images. Doesn't matter if your fears are senseless, because the anxiety I'm going to make you feel, it's going to be awful. If you don't try to fix it, it's never going to stop. So give in right now. If you don't give in, you're going to be suffering all day. You're not going to be able to do anything. It's just going to be on your mind. You're not going to be able to concentrate. In fact, why even go someplace if you haven't done this ritual? If you can't get it out of your mind, it's just going to be wrecked anyway. Why go to the movie? You're not going to be able to concentrate on it. So we would find that after a good session, a sufferer would be pretty good for a short time. Some people can hold out all week. Some people would be good for a day or so, and then they kind of start to slip back. And our original answer to this was simply, we'll see you more often, which works really well. We like to do treatment intensively at our center, and intensive for us does not mean how often the person comes in. Intensive for us is how hard the sufferer is working. And we have kind of a practical criteria for deciding frequency. If the person says they only want to come once a week, we'll see them just once a week. If they can follow the homework the way we're telling them. If they have trouble doing that, then we want to see them more often. The other reason we'll see somebody more often is somebody just simply says, I think I need more support. Then we'll see them more often.